Welcome to another deep dive into the extraordinary. This time, we're exploring the captivating life of Padre Pio, an Italian friar who, well, let's just say, some people believe he had some pretty unbelievable abilities, and we're going deep into the stories from those who claim to have experienced it all firsthand.
It's going to be a fascinating deep dive, that's for sure.
It really is. I mean, everyone's heard about Padre Pio and the stigmata, but even if you think you know the basics, the stories we're sharing today, well, they're next level. Get ready to question what's real, what's possible.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to approach this with an open mind. Belief is personal, whether it's about the supernatural or anything else. And these accounts are a window into how people experience the world around Padre Pio.
I totally agree. And you know what? It's one thing to read about Padre Pio in a book, but it's a whole different experience to hear these firsthand accounts, to feel the emotion, the conviction of the people who were convinced they'd witnessed something truly inexplicable. And that's our focus today, not so much the theological debates, but the raw human experience of encountering Padre Pio.
Right. The human element is so important.
So should we jump right in?
Let's do it.
Okay. Buckle up, because this first one is a doozy. So we're talking early 1900s here, way before Padre Pio was a household name. There's this account of him being found in his room, really hurt, bruised, the whole 9 yards. And get this, he claimed the Madonna, the Virgin Mary herself, had comforted him, even placed a pillow under his head. I know, right? Now, you might be thinking, okay, an injury, maybe a bit of exaggeration after the fact, but this story, it kind of sets the stage for what's to come with Padre Pio. This idea of divine intervention, of forces beyond our understanding, directly interacting with his life.
And that idea just seems to amplify as we go through the accounts. Like, there's this woman, covered in tumors, who claims that after meeting who she believed to be Padre Pio's angel, the tumors just vanished. Completely gone.
And then there's the story of that doctor, right?
Oh, yes. The one who was adamant that Padre Pio assisted with his child's birth, dressed as a medical professional, despite the doctor being certain Padre Pio wasn't physically at the hospital.
Yeah. Talk about being in two places at once, huh? Bilocation. It's a wild concept, but it pops up again and again with Padre Pio. And not just him, but mystical figures throughout history. And a lot of these stories, they involve Padre Pio knowing things he shouldn't, like a baby's gender before it's announced, or what's happening to someone miles away.
Yeah, that's the part that really makes you wonder. It's one thing to hear about someone being in two places at once, but knowing things that seem impossible to know, that's a whole other level.
Totally. It really makes you wonder, right? Are these just really good stories, or is there something more to it? Could these accounts point to an understanding of consciousness, of how we're all connected, that we're just starting to grasp? It's a question that really sticks with you as you delve deeper into the world of Padre Pio and those who encountered him.
It really is. And I think that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. We get to explore these questions and more through the lens of those who believed they'd experienced something truly extraordinary.
And things get even more intense when we get to the World War II years. I mean, can you imagine the fear, the uncertainty everyone was facing back then?
Oh, absolutely. It was a truly tumultuous time in history. And against that backdrop, these accounts of Padre Pio, they take on a whole new meaning.
They really do. And there's one story in particular that just sends chills down my spine every time I read it. It's about this Italian soldier, Luigi Pulcinelli, who was trapped behind enemy lines. He was desperate, didn't know if he'd make it out alive. And in his account, he talks about feeling this presence, this unseen force guiding him, protecting him as he escaped.
And he later identifies that presence as Padre Pio.
Yep. He was convinced that Padre Pio had helped him escape certain death. And it's not just Pulcinelli's story either. There are tons of wartime accounts where people turn to Padre Pio in their darkest hour. Families desperate for news of loved ones missing in action, they'd cling to his every word, every bit of hope he offered.
It's a powerful testament to the human need for hope, for something to believe in, especially in the face of such overwhelming darkness and loss. It makes you think, was Padre Pio a source of genuine comfort and guidance for these people? Or was it their own desperate hope that led them to interpret his words and actions that way? It's a question that's probably impossible to answer definitively, but it speaks to the very core of faith and belief.
It really does. But, war stories are just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to Padre Pio. We haven't even gotten to the mind-boggling stuff yet. The stories about ESP, like he could read minds or something.
Right. Those accounts are something else. Like, there's that story about Padre Pio reading the mind of another friar, Fra Daniele Natali, during prayer, knowing his thoughts, responding to them before a single word was spoken.
Hold on, wait. This Fra Daniele guy, he was like best buzz with Padre Pio, right? They lived and worked together in the same monastery.
That's right, very close.
Wow. Okay, that's even crazier. I mean, were they just that close, or was there something more going on?
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? And then you've got that other story, the one with the guy who, in a moment of anger, hurls his shoe at a picture of Padre Pio. Years later, he meets Padre Pio face to face, and Padre Pio immediately brings up the shoe-throwing incident.
No way. He remembered that after all those years.
According to the accounts, yeah. And if that's not enough, there are multiple stories of Padre Pio knowing what people were going to confess before they even open their mouths.
Okay, now that's just wild. I mean, whether you believe these stories literally or not, they tap into something that's fascinated people forever, right? This idea of a sixth sense, of ESP, of minds being connected in ways we can't even begin to understand. It's definitely out there, but the fact that there are so many of these stories about Padre Pio, and from all kinds of different people, it's hard to just dismiss them completely.
Exactly. Skepticism is healthy, but so is open-mindedness. And the sheer volume and consistency of these accounts, they definitely make you stop and think. Maybe, just maybe, there's more to the human mind, to consciousness itself, than we currently understand.
But you know what really takes the cake when it comes to Padre Pio?
I bet I can guess. Bilocation, right?
Bingo. I mean, those stories of him showing up in different places, sometimes oceans apart, all without ever leaving his monastery. It's mind-blowing.
It really is. And you know, it's not like these stories were just whispered rumors. Even Padre Pio himself talked about these experiences.
He did. What'd he say?
Well, there's this one quote where he says something like, he may not know if it's his body or his soul that's doing the traveling, but he always knows where he ends up.
Wow. So he knew it was happening, but he didn't necessarily understand how it was possible.
That seems to be the gist of it, yeah.
Wild. So we've got all these people all over the world claiming they saw Padre Pio during some of the most intense moments of their lives on battlefields, you name it. And they're convinced it was really him, offering comfort, even protection.
And you know what gets me about these bilocation stories? Even some of the people who were initially skeptical of the ones who set out to debunk the whole thing, they came away scratching their heads. They couldn't explain what these people claimed to have seen.
It really makes you think about the power of belief, doesn't it? Like, what if the sheer conviction of these people, their absolute certainty that they had encountered Padre Pio, somehow, I don't know, made it real?
It's a fascinating question, and I'm not sure there's a simple answer. But it speaks to the larger mystery of consciousness, of how our minds interact with the world around us. Maybe there's more to reality than we currently understand, more than our scientific models can explain.
That's a good point. And I think that's what makes Padre Pio such an enduring figure.
Hmm.
He embodies that sense of mystery, of the unknown. He forces us to confront the limits of our own understanding.
Absolutely. And whether you believe he was a saint, a mystic, or just a really interesting guy who got caught up in something extraordinary, there's no denying the impact he had on those around him.
No doubt. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and, let's call it, unique abilities of Padre Pio, I gotta say, I'm left with more questions than answers. It's like peeling back layers of an onion. Every story reveals another layer of intrigue.
I agree, and I think that's a good thing. The best deep dives leave you with that sense of wonder, that desire to keep exploring.
For sure. And who knows, maybe somewhere in those unanswered questions, in those lingering mysteries, we might just find a glimpse of something truly extraordinary within ourselves.
I mean, wouldn't that be something?